So for the past few years that I've had my Nintendo Switch, I've left it pretty much completely stock, with the exceptions of a few accessories like the Pro Controller and a couple others. Custom Joy-Cons have been on my radar for a long time, so that's what we're going to be doing today. So there we have it, guys. The new custom Joy-Cons on my Nintendo Switch. I think they turned out really awesome. I love the color scheme. I actually saw it on the reviews for one of these components, either the shell or the buttons. Someone had done something very similar, and I really like the combination of the semi-shiny scarlet red and the white shells on the Joy-Cons. I think it looks really good, and I'm very happy with how it turned out. So for this video, guys, I really wanted to, I'm not making so much a tutorial, like this isn't a step-by-step guide on disassembling Joy-Cons and replacing the shells and the buttons. This is more of just my experience going through and doing it, and whether or not it's a process that's worth doing. Because it's definitely not as easy as it sounds, just replacing the shells and the buttons. There's a lot of little components in there and a lot of little ribbon cables that can be kind of a pain, and disassembly can be a little bit tedious. Along with that, I definitely want to give some of my recommendations when it comes to disassembling the Joy-Cons and anything that can maybe help you guys out in the process if it's something you are looking to do. So first off, going through my experience of doing this customization to the Joy-Cons, I started off with the right Joy-Con, and that I think was a little bit of a mistake because this one is a lot more complex than the left one, which I didn't realize. I really hadn't watched any tutorials or any teardowns before I attempted doing this, but when I got stuck on a couple parts, I did end up looking at some other videos. But I started off with the right one, which, like I said, it's got a lot more going on inside than the left Joy-Con. We do have the presence of like an IR sensor and more stuff and more components inside like that, more ribbon cables to deal with. So it definitely makes it a little bit of a pain. I'm not sure what all those components do, but this one definitely has a lot more going on than the left Joy-Con. So my recommendation, if you're not real comfortable with doing, if it's something you haven't done before, I probably would start with the left one. It's a lot easier, can kind of get you warmed up on it before you tackle the right one. And along with that recommendation, I do recommend that you don't use your stock or one and only set of Joy-Cons. As you guys saw in the beginning of this video, I had just the plain black Joy-Cons on here that came with this Switch, and I didn't want to touch those and mess them up, just in case if I did screw something up, I'm not out my original set of Joy-Cons. So what I did do, and the Fortnite community is probably not too happy with me on this one, I bought another set of Joy-Cons to customize. So as you guys saw, I ended up buying the Fortnite edition Joy-Cons off Amazon. They were the lowest price ones that I could find that were OEM Nintendo Joy-Cons without being like a third-party manufacturer. Prime shipping, and they were the lowest price out of the other colored Joy-Cons. So I purchased those, that way if I mess those up, I'm not out the one and only set of Joy-Cons I initially had on this device. So the teardown on the right Joy-Con was the first one I had done, and I had never done these before, like I said, so it was a little bit hectic with all the ribbon cables and stuff like that, but just take your time with it, don't rush, and whenever you do get the shell open and stuff, make sure you don't, yank it apart, because there are ribbon cables that are holding together not holding together, but connected from the top side of the shell and the bottom side of the shell. So just be careful of that. Then the battery shelf also has ribbon cables coming from it. So make sure when you do unscrew that, you don't end up just pulling it off, as there is a ribbon cable attached to those too. The triggers can be a little bit tricky. Basically, the ZR and ZL, when they're attached, they're held by a couple little knobs on these prongs that stick out, and they basically clip over the top of them. So that can be a little bit tricky getting around those, but basically you just want to take some sort of tweezers or something like that to try and wedge them off, and then just pull them out. And then this is where you do have to be careful too. There are two springs under there that gives it its recoil retention, so you want to make sure when you pull them off you don't lose those springs, and because they are sitting in there kind of freely and they're only held in by the trigger, so just make sure you're careful when you pull them off you don't lose those. I think the hardest part of the right Joy-Con on the Nintendo Switch is there's some ribbon cables that come from the bottom of the actual PCB, and unlatching those and getting them unattached and reattached after is kind of a pain. And I'm not sure, I know one of those ribbon cables comes from the IR sensor. The other one's kind of that black plate that sits under the PCB, and I'm not sure what component that is, but it also comes from under the PCB and attaches. So that one is also kind of a pain. So the left side was pretty much a cakewalk compared to the right side. We don't have the presence of an IR sensor, and we don't have that other ribbon cable that sits under the PCB that we have to deal with. So that's definitely a big pro and makes the left Joy-Con a lot easier. Other than that, they're pretty much the same. Obviously, your joysticks and your main buttons are relocated a little bit, so that's really the only difference, but you just have less components than what goes into the right side, so a lot easier to work with. And like I said, I probably would recommend, if you guys are just getting into this, starting with the left one, and that's probably what I would have done. Talking about the shell and the buttons I went with, these are all parts from Extreme Rate, and they're a company that are pretty prevalent on Amazon. They sell a lot of different console and controller mods and customizations, mostly like buttons, shells for different types of controllers, all sorts of stuff. But so we have an Extreme Rate soft touch shell on here for the Joy-Cons, and then we have some of their button replacements for the Joy-Cons on the Switch. And really nice stuff. I really love the way they feel. The Joy-Cons do have that soft plastic feel, which is really nice. Makes it really comfortable compared to any other types of plastic. Kind of that smooth porous plastic, which I really like. So they feel just like an original manufacturer Nintendo Switch Joy-Con, which is a huge plus. The buttons I'm a big fan of. I was a little bit skeptical seeing how they come. They actually come on like one of these little grid pieces, so, and you just pop them out. So I was like, oh, that seems a little bit sketchy, but it's really not once you get them off, and they don't have any sort of excess plastic you got to remove usually. So once you get them off and installed, they feel really nice. They're a little bit rougher as far as the touch goes, and that might be the finish that I got compared to the original Joy-Con buttons. But overall, I love the way they look. They have a really good feel as well. As far as the color selection goes for the Joy-Cons, they have a pretty big variety of just like standard colors. They have some different types of clear, transparent colors. They do have iridescent colors as well. So these particular buttons, these are the scarlet red buttons, and they're not like a chrome or anything, but they do have a little bit of a shine to them, which I like. But they are pretty much like a matte finish. But like I said, the buttons have quite a few different options as far as colors go. So I also used Extreme Rate parts recently on the Xbox controller that I did. I think they might do these thumbsticks, I don't know that for sure, but they definitely did the triggers and bumpers I put on, and then the D-pad. So really nice parts. I'm very happy with them so far. Not sponsored or anything, but I will have links below to where you can find some of their stuff for the Joy-Cons. So final consensus on doing custom Joy-Cons, mostly talking about swapping the shells and the buttons. Is it worth doing or not? Because it's definitely not the easiest task to get done. But overall, I think it's definitely worth it, especially if you want to customize your Nintendo Switch to a very specific color scheme. I definitely think it's worth doing. The parts are out there and they're not super expensive. If you already have a set of Joy-Cons you're willing to take apart, as far as price goes, you're looking at about $30 to get some custom buttons and shells. These shells usually run around $20, and then if you do get a separate button kit from those shells, these are around $10, so around $35 I would say. These shells do come with buttons already, but depending on which color you choose as far as the shell goes, they include a certain color of buttons. The white ones just include plain black buttons. Now the price tag I mentioned is if you already have Joy-Cons laying around. I ended up purchasing another set of Joy-Cons just to be safe that I don't mess up my original ones. So they run around $70 these days, it seems like. I haven't picked up any from like GameStop, but some of the ones on Amazon I'm seeing are around $70. So my final consensus on doing custom Joy-Cons for your Nintendo Switch, I would say it's definitely worth it if you want to give your Nintendo Switch a very custom look and feel. I think this is a good way to go as far as customizing your Nintendo Switch without digging into the actual device itself, and just working on the Joy-Cons is a really good way to go. It is a little bit of a tedious process, but it's not impossible, so I just recommend taking your time, and having the right tools is always super helpful. So for this I did use my iFixit kit, which came in handy with all the extra wedge tools and tri-wing screwdrivers, as you do need some of those to get into the Joy-Cons themselves. So a lot of these kits too, with the shells and buttons, they do come with some tools, so you might be able to get away with some of the tools that are included. So that's gonna wrap up this video, guys. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed it. You got a pretty good idea on what it's like getting into some Joy-Cons and doing a shell swap and button swap to really customize your Joy-Cons. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure to drop a like on it, and if you want to see more tech related videos like this one, be sure to subscribe. As always, guys, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.